Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. So today I thought I would have a look at something that I found on Twitter, which was rather entertaining, but also potentially rather aggravating for some people. There's a woman on Twitter who you may have heard of. She's kind of infamous in many different circles, including Christian circles. And for those of you who are not familiar with me, I am a Christian psychology student. So I have my bachelor's degree in psychology and I am now working on postgraduate. But this woman on Twitter goes by the handle of the transformed wife. And so I don't actually know what her real name is, but I do know that she's good friends with Pearly Things. So if you've heard of her, then you might have heard of the transformed wife. And both of those women are very popular in what's known as the manosphere. So the manosphere is people like Andrew Tate, who is all about like dominating women and exploiting women and doing all sorts of gross, shady things. And like, he's not 100% wrong all of the time about his social commentary. He sometimes points out things that are true, and you know, you can agree with these people some of the time, but generally speaking they have a very degrading view of women. And it's interesting that some of the people who have this degrading view of women are women. But according to the transformed wife's Twitter sort of bio section, she believes that she is helping women and she is providing leadership in a biblical sense. One of the women that she seems to have a real issue with is Taylor Swift. And so she's tweeted about Taylor a few times, and we're going to have a look at that, and we're going to have a look at the particular song that she thinks is like an example of how Taylor has basically lost her way and is this degenerate person now. You will probably laugh when you find out which lyrics she's pointing to, because I certainly did. But before we get into that, I'm just going to have a quick look at some of the tweets that the transformed wife has put out there, just to give you some context about who she is, and also just to give you some insight into what the Bible actually does say about women, because it's relevant. She has made it relevant, and it's also important. Okay, so the first tweet that we've got says, "Working mothers feel guilty for leaving their children every day for work. Stay-at-home mothers feel guilty for not bringing in money. Feminism makes women to continually feel guilty and discontent. God wants women at home caring for their own children with the husbands working hard to provide. Problem solved, no guilt." She's making a blanket statement about billions of people's lives that she has absolutely no insight into, based on nothing that I've ever read in the Bible. And I think maybe people who say things like this on the internet, they don't necessarily have much knowledge or insight into history and historical contexts for different things. Because I mean, she's got another tweet here which says, "There isn't one woman in the Bible who left her home all day to work for a boss and paycheck while her children were in daycare/public schools, whose purpose was to get mothers and children out of their homes, so children will be influenced by strangers rather than their own mothers." So in that one, she's kind of implying that there's like an agenda here. And certainly in some countries, there is a history of like this agenda to indoctrinate children. That was certainly a thing in like the Soviet communist countries. But I don't think in the West that it's necessarily this big conspiracy to indoctrinate children and to wrangle them away from their parents. I think it just comes down to greed, and they just don't care who raises the children, because as long as they have 100% of adults in the workforce who are having to actually go out to work, both parents, because otherwise they cannot afford to have a home, then, you know, it suits business owners, it suits big business. What she's talking about in terms of like the paycheck thing, she says, I've never read in the Bible that women went out to work. Yeah, well, you've also never read in the Bible that men went out to work, because that was not a thing at that time in history. This is what I'm saying about people like this don't seem to know history at all. Like, has she not heard of the Industrial Revolution, which was pretty much responsible for taking people from like farming communities into big cities and factories? And that was why suddenly, you know, men, women, and children were working constantly. And we haven't really deviated from that plan much since then. I mean, we've deviated in some respects because, you know, workers unionized and they managed to get decent conditions for themselves so that they weren't working 6 or 7 days a week for very little pay. I understand that in America, there's still a lot of very like archaic sorts of industrial laws where, you know, employers can really just treat their employees like slaves. But in Australia, at least, we have a lot of workers' rights built into things. So, you know, there's health and safety laws that make sure that people can't operate heavy machinery without like a 10-hour break in a 24-hour day, because that's dangerous, and things like that. So yeah, she's got this really weird worldview where somehow feminism is responsible for like the Industrial Revolution, but that's not the case. So in the context of the Bible, at that point in history, people didn't have jobs. Like, they didn't go to a factory, they didn't go to a workplace, they didn't have corporations that ran things. They had allotments of land that they worked. And so people were kind of like subsistence farmers, and they lived in small communities. And that was still the case up until like late 1600s, early 1700s, during the Industrial Revolution. And then because of the Industrial Revolution, then we have things like, you know, Dickens novels where people are absolutely destitute, but they work like 24/7 in horrendous conditions that are life-threatening on a daily basis. And that's not just men, but also women and small children. So people having to go to work, that's not like the fault of feminism. It's the fault of exploitation of human labor by greedy people. So what does the Bible say about women who work? Well, let's go to Proverbs 31, which is known as the ideal wife. So Proverbs 31 says, "An excellent wife who can find? She's far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands." Oh my goodness. Does she have a job? She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. Oh my goodness. Did she just purchase property without consulting her husband? Someone lock this woman up. Why is this in the Bible? She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. Oh my goodness, she's yoked. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She's a small business owner. She puts her hand to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits amongst the elders of the land. Gosh, her husband is like a renowned person because guess what? He doesn't have to micromanage his wife. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. The time to come usually in the Bible is like basically Judgment Day. So, you know, when we'll all be judged after we die. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Oh my goodness. Are women capable of teaching people and using wisdom? She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. A man praising a woman? Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. So she has earned what she has. What is this? The Bible contradicting someone who claims to be an expert on the Bible? One of the biggest problems is how many people are biblically illiterate. Either people who are teaching the Bible, or people who are listening to people who are teaching the Bible, or people who are disagreeing with people who are teaching the Bible. Like, none of them seem to know what the Bible actually says. And so you can't have a real discussion about what the Bible actually means because no one has gone to check the source material. So personally, I put very little stock in this woman's opinion about what women should do and what the Bible says. And I don't think she understands historical context. I don't think she understands economics. I don't think she understands the Bible. I don't think she understands much. However, she is very self-congratulatory on how awesome she is and how perfect she is. And she loves to tell people how superior she is to them. So in this tweet, she says, "I didn't care about a college education, a career, or a paycheck. I didn't care about extravagance and having a perfectly decorated home while dressing in the latest fashions. I didn't care about traveling the world and experiencing everything this life has to offer. All I wanted growing up was to marry, bear children, and guide the home, even though this was never taught to me. It was instinctive to me, and my mum did it. Satan's plan was to take this instinct away from females and make them have the desire to pursue the things of the world. He won." Okay, well, congratulations on never wanting to educate yourself or contribute financially to your family. But not everyone has that luxury. Some of us were not able to be a stay-at-home parent. That's not something that's been on offer. She claims that she wanted to do it instinctively because her mum did it. I think, you know, realistically, this is what psychology would say is like a learned behavior. So she saw her mum do it and that's what she aspired to. It doesn't mean that it's like ingrained in her because of genetics or because of being female and having the right chromosomes to do that. So here we get some further insight into who she is as a person in this tweet. She says, "I was a 22-year-old educated woman when I married, but I hated feminism and all it stood for. College, workforce, put kids in daycare, etc. But I still had a rebellious spirit and wanted to be the leader in the home, get my own way. I was a contentious and quarrelsome wife until a wise older woman exhorted me to become a godly, submissive wife and with a meek and quiet spirit. All young women need to be taught this. It doesn't come naturally for most." Okay, being quarrelsome is more like a personality issue. Like, you seem very quarrelsome now. So she was 22 when she got married. So she was very, very young. She had not experienced much of the world. She was probably freshly out of college. I don't know what she studied or whether she had any like actual career plans or anything like that. But, you know, there's plenty to criticize about feminism. There is a lot that is wrong with the postmodern version of feminism, which people should critique, because feminism these days tends to despise men, and rather than wanting to work with men to find a peaceful solution for coexisting, instead it tries to make men obsolete, and it tries to blame men for literally everything. So the way that feminism has demonized men is not accurate, and it's not fair, because most men are stuck in the same system as most women, where they are exploited by employers until they die, and they are not emotionally fulfilled in their relationships, because most of the time their relationships are full of games and contention. So perhaps this particular woman needed to understand that she needed to work with her husband instead of against him in order to be a team. However, that doesn't mean that a woman needs to be completely subservient to a man and have absolutely no say in her own life and in the household that she is part of. The thing is, that level of micromanagement doesn't really work for most people, and in reality it's quite an abusive system to live in, to be constantly controlled and managed by someone for like the most minute detail of your life. And most men don't really want to babysit a grown woman. Like, they don't have that kind of time. They don't have that kind of energy. They have enough on their plate doing their own thing. So like my husband, for example, he's got his own job, he has plenty of things that he needs to do, plenty of things that he wants to do in the way of hobbies and whatnot. He doesn't have time to micromanage me. And not only that, like, that's talking about like ordinary life, but for the last 5 months, he's been in and out of hospital multiple times. And he only just got out of hospital in the last 2 weeks, where he had been for 2 weeks before that. So if I relied on my husband to the extent that I, you know, didn't have a job, didn't know how to run the household, didn't know how to pay bills, didn't have access to money, didn't drive a car, wasn't able to do all of these things which feminism has enabled me to do, then where would myself and my husband be right now? He actually relies on me to be able to manage things in his absence. And historically, that has always been the case. I mean, you think about the biblical context. People had to go off to war. They had to spend like years away from home. And so men were often away for long periods of time. And who ran the farm? Who ran the merchant business? Who kept things running while the young able-bodied men were away? Because again, historically, there weren't really that many elderly men to speak of. Like, people's life expectancy wasn't really that long. The whole stay-at-home housewife phenomenon is actually a very recent invention of the Western world, and it was quite short-lived, to be honest, because it didn't really happen on a wider scale until like the early 20th century, because women still needed to work a lot. The amount of effort that it took to run a household back then was enormous, and the average person was not middle class. It was only very wealthy people who could really afford to have women of leisure. It was only very wealthy people who could afford to have only one person working. And so for the majority of people, for the majority of human history, women have had to work. And that's just reality. The fact that we have to work long hours outside of home is a recent phenomenon. And I think, like most people, would prefer to spend more time at home. I don't think people really do it because they enjoy the grind that much. Sure, some people are materialistic and they do want to have lavish lifestyles, which they can only afford if they work extremely hard and have a very high education. But again, feminism is not responsible for that. It's market economics. One other thing that she said was, that women should be raising their own children and not putting them into daycare. And I do actually kind of agree with that. So it's not really that beneficial to children to be predominantly raised by an outsourced person. You don't get consistency. Like, people come and go from jobs, and children need stable attachment figures. So if you send them to like a daycare center, they might have the same carer for years on end, but chances are they won't. And also the amount of time and attention that most children need is not provided by someone who has to take care of 20 kids. So kids who are predominantly raised in childcare do have some issues with attachment, and they can also end up with some personality issues because of not getting enough attention and perhaps having to do things like naughty things in order to get the sort of attention that they need. And also perhaps not being sufficiently disciplined. So there's no one really to check on them, to hold them accountable when they do something wrong. And like, people in childcare, they're constantly worried about being sued. So they're much less likely to discipline a child than a parent would. And I'm not talking about physical discipline, because I don't think that that necessarily is the answer anyway. So I do think that when people choose to have children, that they need to understand that there is some sacrifice that needs to be made for the benefit of their children, so that they have, what they need in terms of developmental support from their parents. The first 3 to 5 years of a child's life are the most crucial. So those are the years when parents need to be most present and most active in their children's lives. So I would agree that people go back to work way too quickly, which again probably comes back to a lot of economic pressures, and they probably do too much work too quickly. So maybe some of that could actually be remedied by wanting less material stuff. So in some respects, she is correct, but there's this very kind of condescending attitude that goes with it that makes a lot of her message very unpalatable to a lot of people. She's super judgmental about other people's circumstances, and the reality is that not everyone has the luxury that she has. She's in a very privileged position. So now that we've talked about the transformed wife in quite a bit of detail, let's have a look at what she said about Taylor Swift. Okay, so this is the first tweet that she wrote about Taylor Swift that I've seen. She's probably tweeted other ones, but I just haven't gone through all of her Twitter. She says, Taylor Swift went from singing sweet love songs to dark, evil ones. That's a pretty dramatic claim to make. Fame and fortune doesn't do a body good. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that. There probably is a level of fame that's just incredibly hard to live with. And if you listen to interviews with Taylor Swift, she's like, yeah, fame is hard. The lyrics of the song that made Taylor Swift famous in 2008, he knelt to the ground and pulled out a ring and said, "Marry me, Juliet, you'll never have to be alone. I love you and that's all I really know. I talked to your dad, go pick out a white dress. It's a love story, baby, just say yes." So personally, I always thought that song was like a bit Disney fairy tale. So it definitely showed her age at the time, because she was a teenager. She was literally still in school. So she was a child talking about relationships, and she had this very idealized version of relationships, which was probably from various different types of media, such as Disney films. So it's not surprising that her lyrics back then were very wide-eyed and naive. The transformed wife continues, "These are the lyrics to her most popular song now. Sometimes I feel like everybody is a sexy baby and I'm a monster on the hill. Too big to hang out, slowly lurching toward your favorite city, pierced through the heart but never killed." So, for those of you who are familiar with Taylor Swift's music, you would probably just be laughing at this. Like, this is the worst lyrics that she managed to find from Taylor, and it's just hilarious. But she ends by saying, "Be careful who your daughters listen to and learn from." And then the next tweet that I found, which didn't specifically name Taylor Swift, but I'm guessing it's about her. She says, "Every single one of the famous women who dress provocatively and sing loudly on stage are doing the exact opposite of what God calls them to do, even if they claim to be a Christian. God calls women to be modest, with meek and quiet spirits, not draw attention to their bodies, sensual moves, and often seductive lyrics. Why would any godly mother want any of these women as a role model for their daughters?" Well, first of all, Taylor Swift does not really have seductive lyrics, as far as I can tell. And secondly, this woman is kind of displaying her biblical illiteracy again, because she's talking about modesty. And I've got a whole video on modesty and what the Bible actually says about it, because what the Bible says about modesty is not sexual modesty, it's about wealth modesty. So in the Bible, it tells people not to wear expensive clothes with fancy hairdos and jewelry, because it creates this kind of class distinction in the church, and they don't want the poorer members of the church to feel different to the rich members of the church. And so in my previous video on modesty, as you can imagine, I had some scathing things to say about modern Christianity and the displays of disgusting wealth that preachers put on. So that's what the Bible is talking about. It's not talking about women who are dressing sensually. I mean, there are passages in Proverbs about people who are seductors, who kind of reel people in to play with them, use them up, and then spit them out. But how you dress is not necessarily a reflection of that. Plus, I don't think Taylor actually fits into that category anyway. She's never really worn anything that provocative. For the Eras tour, she's worn a lot of like sparkly suits that help her to stand out on stage so that the people watching from the crowd are able to spot her. Okay, so we're gonna have a quick look at the Taylor Swift video that the transformed wife was quoting from, which is the song Anti-Hero. Okay, so far, nothing particularly sexual about it, nothing particularly controversial or lascivious, but we'll keep watching. Maybe we'll get to the controversial part.
I should not be left to my own devices. They come with prices and vices. I end up in crisis. All this time, I wake up screaming from dreaming. One day I'll watch as you're leaving, 'cause you got tired of my scheming. For the last time, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me.
Okay, so far this song really just seems like you know, an exploration of all of her deepest insecurities and fears and ruminations that pretty much go through her head all the time. And so it's not really like a dangerous song. I think it's just a relatable song.
At tea time, everybody agrees. I'll stare directly at the sun, but never in the mirror. It must be exhausting, always rooting for the anti-hero.
Yeah, so again, she's just kind of talking about her inner struggles with like trusting people in relationships. I can only imagine what it's like to be very famous and very wealthy, because it would come with a whole new set of problems. But it seems like she's kind of internalized a lot of the like blame for that stuff. So like how people treat her is her own fault because of them pretty much just claiming that that is the case. So, you know, you sit around the dinner table with a bunch of people and everyone agrees that you're the problem. Sometimes it could be true, or sometimes you might just be surrounded by a bunch of jerks.
Sometimes I feel like everybody is a sexy baby, and I'm a monster on the hill. Too big to hang out, slowly lurching toward your favorite city, pierced through the heart but never killed.
Okay, so that was the apparently evil and dark lyrics that Taylor Swift was responsible for. And like, if you look at the video and you also look at Taylor Swift at events and in interviews and things like that, she's very tall. She towers over everyone else, and so she's sort of surrounded in Hollywood by all of these very like sexy people who are probably quite tiny. From what I understand of Hollywood, yeah, on average, the people who work in the entertainment industry are really small. Like, I used to be involved in student films when I was at university for my first degree. And I was probably about the same height as most of the guys. And I'm not that tall. If you're wondering, I'm about 5'7". So if I'm wearing, you know, a few inches of heel, then I guess I would be like 5'9". So that's still pretty average for most women in Western countries. That's not particularly tall. But Taylor Swift is, I think, like 5'10" or something like that without heels on. So if she gets dressed up and she's got high heels on, then she would easily be like 6 foot tall. And I just think it's hilarious the way that she has expressed how this makes her feel being so much taller than everyone else around her. So she kind of sees the people around her, they're all like these sexy babies. And then she's this monster lurching towards your favorite city. It's like, it's just really entertaining. I think it's hilarious.
Did you hear my covert narcissism? Like disguises altruism, like some kind of consciousness. I wake up screaming from dreaming. One day I'll watch as you're leaving, and life will lose all its meaning. For the last time, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me. At tea time, everybody agrees. I'll stare directly at the sun, but never in the mirror. It must be exhausting, always rooting for the anti-hero.
Yeah, so I don't see anything, you know, dark or evil about that particular song. It's just, it's kind of like an honest expression of what it's like to deal with your own issues and your own toxicity and stuff. How You know, there's some reference there to an eating disorder that she has struggled with in the past, and being her own harshest critic. And I think that that's something that everyone kind of relates to, and it's probably something that we do need to deal with.
Using poetry and songs to talk about the roller coaster of emotions that people frequently go through is a very biblical concept. The Psalms are essentially full of ups and downs that David, the main psalmist, went through. So sometimes they would be adulation of God, sometimes they would be the pits of despair, sometimes it would be rage at people who had screwed him over, and sometimes it would be him repenting and talking about how broken he was as a person and asking God for mercy. So this is very normal.
So Taylor Swift opening up these kinds of conversations, she's not doing anything bad, she's not doing anything wrong. She's certainly not misleading young women. I think that the transformed wife, if she really believes all of this stuff, I think she's just got issues. And maybe she needs to figure those out rather than posting a whole bunch of weird stuff on Twitter. There's probably more that I could say about her content and that sort of thing, you know. Like, she talks about how women need to be subservient to their husbands and that sort of thing. But she's not really listening to the Bible, because in the biblical worldview, like, men are leaders and women trust their husbands and, you know, listen to what they say and work with them. Saying that women are supposed to be obedient and subservient is not really what the Bible actually talks about, because what the Bible talks about is how if you are in a position of leadership, then you are the servant of the people that you are leading. That's how it's actually supposed to work. So we can have a look at Matthew chapter 20. So it says in Matthew chapter 20, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." So this is supposed to be the biblical blueprint for marriage, where the church follows and trusts Jesus's leadership and his decision-making abilities. And wives are supposed to trust their husband's decision-making abilities if the husband is actually doing what he is biblically supposed to be doing, which is serving his wife, serving her interests, looking after her, thinking about what she needs, thinking about what she wants, and working towards it. There's a really good book that I bought a while ago, and I've read, you know, bits and pieces through it, but not the whole thing so far. But it's called Servant Leadership in Action. So this is written by a Christian man who, Ken Blanchard, if you want to look him up. And he was very prominent in business. I think he's kind of retired now. But he talks about how in business, so business leadership, you need to be a servant if you are at the top. The leaders are supposed to be serving their underlings and trying to, like, look after them in many respects. So what it has in this book is a blueprint which he got from the way Jesus runs his organization, which is, you know, the church. And so it's based on the biblical view of leadership, which is that the person who is the top, who is the leader, puts themselves last. So So in other words, leadership is not supposed to be self-serving. It's not supposed to be self-aggrandizing. It's not supposed to abuse power over anyone or anything like that. So the stuff that she comes out with on Twitter is just anti-biblical. It's anti-Jesus. It's completely against what the scriptures talk about. Again, she doesn't seem to know much about anything that she talks about. She doesn't know much about the Bible. She doesn't know much about history and economic context. She doesn't even know that much about Taylor Swift when she's commenting on these things. Like, educate yourself before you open your mouth, and then you might have something interesting to say. Anyway, guys, that is my particular take on the transformed wife and Taylor Swift's music. If you would like to leave your thoughts in the comments, go ahead. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and I will see you next time. Take care, God bless, and goodbye.